Hello and welcome to the 1916 podcast. I'm Tim Masso here with Armand Johnston. Today we are discussing traveling with your watch and travel watches. Now, if you haven't seen my How to Travel with Your Watch feature on the 1916 Company YouTube channel, definitely check that out. If you've ever wondered about customs, scanners, theft and danger on unfamiliar streets, all of that and more, you can check out How to Travel with Your Watch. Today we're going to be talking about travel watches specifically and the ones we prefer to take and what we recommend for you. So I'm going to throw this over to Armand. Armand, how did you interpret this theme? Because our production team suggested it. How did you envision this?
So I interpreted this in two different ways, actually. The first of which was obvious travel complications, world timers, GMTs, dual times. And the second was safe watches to travel with.
I like that one right there, safe watches. Let's talk a little bit about safe watches out of the gate, because it seems like a week doesn't pass that some F1 driver, pro athlete, or celebrity doesn't either lose or get robbed of a very expensive watch. So let's just talk about traveling with a watch first. Where do we start? Do we think about customs or do we think about crime?
I think about crime. You know, we'll talk about I can talk, personally about the customs situation. I never take my watch off when I'm going through the airport. Do not do it. Don't take your watch off through security. Don't take it off through customs. If you're wearing it, nobody's going to ask about it.
That's a good piece of advice, because although in theory you have to declare everything that you take out and bring in, generally you have to declare on both sides. I've never seen anyone bugged over just a watch. Now, I understand there were some crackdowns on watch tourism in China over the last decade, but even so, for the most part, if you're traveling with one watch, especially in the West, no one's going to give you trouble about it. There are some places where they have a bit more familiarity. In Germany and Switzerland, they've gotten pretty good at spotting new Pateks, Rolex, and Langes. So outbound from a place like that, you might want to be a little bit coy. The key is to not travel with the box and the papers.
And I'll say Germany is a specific stickler for customs in general.
Yeah, you got to be really careful there, because they will look and they will check. And of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger famously had people go through his luggage and they found this watch. They asked, "Are you going to take it back out of the country?" And he's like, "No, I'm going to auction it." And he was doing everything right. It was basically a charity piece. And he had to pay a tax on it on the spot. And they actually held him until first his credit card was denied. Then he had to make a phone call and the credit card was accepted, but hours passed. This is a guy who is a governor of a state, and he's not German, he's Austrian. All the same, though, you would have thought they would have given him a little bit of benefit of the doubt. So if you get caught, it can still be a big problem in Germany. Don't get caught with the box and papers, because that's the dead giveaway if they happen to spot search you that you've got something you just bought. So that's traveling with a watch and not getting caught outbound. In theory, there is U.S. Customs form. Again, you can see my special on how to travel with a watch. You can declare your watch when you're leaving, and then when you come back, you can show them the form and they'll let you pass through. But for the most part, this has not been a problem. And scanners are not going to damage your watch. Absolutely not. Not a problem. They will let you wear your watch too through the scanner. That is not going to be a problem.
I've personally delivered repairs. Well, actually, the most notable one, it was interesting. I was delivering a 7-figure repair in London, actually, and Tim's distracting with pictures of Squash.
Squash is a puppy.
I was delivering a 7-figure repair to a client in London, and I was asked the purpose of my travel, and I said, business. They asked me a few more questions. Ultimately, they did know I had a watch in my bag, and they were asking, why did your company send somebody to return a repair? And I said, because of the value. And both of these two customs people asked me, well, it's a watch, mate. How much could it be? And I was like, well, technically, I'm supposed to request a private screening to answer that question, and they at that point did let me through. But it was a very interesting few minutes there. They were obviously interested in what it was I was doing, but not to the point where I think they were going to hold me up.
Yeah, and in case this isn't completely obvious, if the watch isn't on your wrist, do not check it in a bag. I've seen this happen.
Cannot overstate that enough.
hide it in your mouth if you've got to. Do not check that thing. Okay, that's like beyond ridiculous.
Wear it on your other wrist if you're already wearing a watch. Legitimately, do everything you can but to check it. And honestly, like I said, I usually travel with one watch. Occasionally, I'll bring a second, very occasionally, but just wear it through.
Yeah, now if you do plan to sell your watch or auction your watch while you're abroad, the idea, I think, is that you wear a Richard Mille going out, sell the Richard Mille, take a small portion of the proceeds, buy a Custos, and wear that back. They won't know the difference. Here's the other thing. Crime is a factor, and not just in the third world. I keep getting told by people that places like Paris and London are now hotbeds of watch theft. I've even seen street signs, like permanent municipally posted street signs along the lines of walk, stop, traffic circle, saying do not lose your watch. And these are permanent street signs that say do not lose your watch, and they're in England. And I thought, well, it's nice of them to say. I really maybe wish they'd spent more money on police than the sign. But all the same, if it's that serious, you have to take it into account. Never travel with something you can't afford to lose. Never travel with something that's not insured. And speak to your insurer before you go abroad if you do insist on this. Never go someplace where you have a watch that's so valuable it would be worth someone's time to cut your wrist off with the watch still attached and run. Crazy things have happened.
We've all read Deadbeat Seconds at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was a little bit worse, but assuming they let the rest of you live, some people will be incredibly violent in taking a watch, and they're not particular about what it is. It may not be until after the fact they realize they've ripped off a Longines. Longines look more and more expensive every year. They're good watches. But there is a danger there, and you got to be careful. And if you're going abroad and you've got these crazy watches, if your social media feed is all like your watches and cars and luxury lifestyle, if you have a high enough profile, there is a chance you could get in trouble. Pro athletes do this all the time, posting an RM and then getting robbed either in the parking lot of the F1 race or during a home invasion. Don't be flamboyant about this stuff if you don't want the wrong people to know.
It's very much a smart traveler type of scenario. If you travel smart, if you are aware of your surroundings, if you're unlike me and not getting blackout drunk places, then you'll be okay.
Yeah, that's a big one. I will say this. If you wake up without your watch, it's your own damn fault. If that's the moment you realize it's gone. I will say this too. There are also watches to bring abroad that are the right kind of travel watches. And these have nothing to do with secondary time zones. They have to do with price. Don't wear more than you can afford to lose. For some people, this is going to be like a Mido Ocean Star GMT, which is a great watch. But if that were to get stolen, either from a safe deposit box in a hotel room or right off your wrist, you could recover from that. That's the reason why I travel abroad. If I'm going to a city or a neighborhood I don't know, I wear a Swatch watch. And I've never had a problem. But if I did, I'm protected. So keep that in mind. Your travel watch may not be some sort of travel-specific model, but something that you can afford to lose. And that's the way I view that. Now, in terms of actual travel watches, Armand, where are we going to start out? Because I think most people think 2 time zones is pretty much the bare minimum for traveling, and they've got a lot of options.
So I would love to start out, actually, with a personal favorite of yours, Tim. And I'm not sure if this is on your list. It very well may have been. But it is the Zenith Doublematic. It is a packed, complicated, awesome watch that does include a world timer, as well as a second time zone.
You know, what it's got is it's got a big date, it's got a world timer, it's got a power reserve for the alarm, and yes, it has an alarm. And so the alarm power reserve indicator, it moves, which is cool, and it moves fast, spinning rapidly and changing color from green to red. There's an on-off function for the alarm, and then there is the world time, as Armand stated. All of this wrapped around an El Primero chronograph. You need the wrist for it because it's a 45. But what a watch. I love that choice. I think for anyone who can wear it, it's kind of like the ultimate watch.
I also think something like this, and maybe not the Doublematic specifically, but this is kind of a rule that I think can make watches less overall desirable to a crime potentially. And Throw it on a NATO. Throw a watch on a rubber strap or a NATO, and it becomes very much less conspicuous.
If they think they're stealing like a Richard Mille because of the size and the complication, then they realize it's a Zenith that's worth like 11 grand. I don't know, maybe they'll back off. It does look more expensive than it is. In my opinion, it looks more expensive than it is.
I completely agree. And honestly, we've talked about this watch a few times, though. The bang for buck involved in the Doublematic is wild. Honestly, I don't say this about many pieces, but even if you don't really have the wrist for it, it's so complicated. It's so cool. It's so different as an object of desire. If you like it, I don't know, rock it.
Yeah, and I like that you started with a world timer because I think what people consider when they think of a travel time watch, they think of 2 time zones. But when you've got a world time, you've got a very handy reference for the 24 principal time zones. And I think for a lot of folks who don't want to consistently reset reference time zones, just having the world time can be very convenient. In some cases, you might just decide to keep your watch set to home time and reference, the ring for your travel time. It's great too because if you're not traveling and you're using this watch to keep track of people who are, it can be very convenient to just glance at those other time zones, especially if they're on the move. That's the other thing about a travel time watch. You don't have to travel. If you got far-flung friends, family, business associates, or you're just trying to keep track of when an F1 race in Japan is happening, a travel time watch can be your friend there, and this is a good example.
An extremely useful complication in different ways. I would also say about world timers in particular, I think a lot of folks will look at it and think they're a little busy and illegible. While some can be less than legible, I find as soon as you're used to reading a world time, it is quickly glanceable.
Yeah, I think it's easiest to just first of all, figure out what the time is where you are, memorize the minutes, and then look at the hour adjacent.
Yep.
I would also say this, since we're talking about world timers, you've got a lot of options in that genre. And the Doublematic's kind of a cool, vaguely pilot-inspired chrono world time alarm. But don't forget that Vacheron made a unique integrated bracelet sports watch world timer. I want to say it's the reference 7700 third generation overseas world time. You will not find a Patek or AP or Longa equivalent of that. No one's really made one. And it's a fascinating watch because it comes with a couple of different dial colors, but most importantly, it's one of the few world time watches that acknowledges we don't have 24 time zones. We have quite a few more than that. And this watch gives you 37 of them. And as you set it, you will watch the hands jump in a non-linear fashion corresponding to time zones that are not demarcated by 60 minutes. So this is a really cool watch. If you're willing to invest a little bit of time in learning to use it, then you're also going to get all of the joys that come with a third generation overseas. Geneva hallmark, display case back, 150 meter water resistance, integrated bracelet, quick release straps, accessory clasp, plenty of lume. All of these things with a level of intricacy in its finish, particularly of the bracelet, that really sets it apart. This is an incredible watch. All you need for this is a big wrist and a budget to match. It's not cheap, but I will say this, it sells at a significant discount from its original retail.
And while it is a big 3 integrated sports piece, it is, to Tim's point, fundamentally different from anything else in the Holy Trinity. You have dial side complication that, again, at a glance looks remarkably more complicated than it is. And this movement is extremely complicated, don't get me wrong. You also just get that integrated steel sports watch feel and look that is widely desired.
Yeah, you're not going to find a Nautilus. You're not going to find an Aquanaut. You're not going to find a Royal Oak, or for that matter, I believe an Offshore that has a true world time function. And this is a great watch. This is a watch that did something so ambitious. No one else chose to follow down that path. Now, it has an incredibly intricate dial with a number of overlapping sapphires, and the quality is equal to the original retail price. Now, today you can find them for quite a bit less. I believe you could probably go out and find one of these things on a bracelet for under $30,000, which is absolutely amazing when you consider what they originally cost. I think at this point, it's probably worth taking a look at what these did originally cost, because like the entire third generation overseas that launched in 2016, it launched into the European southern debt crisis, and these watches were so expensive at the time compared to the previous and chronically discounted second generation overseas that no one felt the need to pay list. And so the chronographs and the self-windings were slow sellers. Hardly anyone bought the world time. So if you want something really unique, the fact that it was not popular and very expensive when new is all to your benefit now. These were like, I want to say mid 30s, but I think somehow they were more than that by the time they went off the market. These are great buys today.
Yeah, and we've talked about the fabled brown dial overseas as well, which this does have a brown dial option, which actually is really nice. It's really, really cool. This is I dig the brown on this a lot.
So let's talk about something a person can actually buy, because I think there's going to be a lot of folks who are like, okay, 5-figure watches, I'm not traveling with that under any circumstances. So let's talk about Tudor and the Black Bay 58 GMT. This came out last year, and in my opinion, this is a great travel watch because it's relatively small, it's relatively discreet. You don't feel like you're slumming it because it's still a luxury brand, and frankly, there's something about a sports watch that seems better suited to travel, because a lot of people travel to go to the beach, to go to the pool, to go in the water. This is water resistant. It's 200 meters. It's still a Black Bay. I feel like with this watch on your wrist, you can go anywhere you want, do anything you want, keep track of what you need to, and because it is sort of like a mini GMT Master, you've got that calculator bezel if you want to calculate a third time zone. Now, the way you do this is you set that 24-hour hand to Greenwich Mean Time. Then you use the GMT offset for the third time zone, and you turn it clockwise or counterclockwise, depending on whether the place is GMT plus or GMT minus. So I think that's a really good idea of what a travel time watch would look like in a more classical paradigm. A sports watch that's rough and ready to go swimming, and gives you two solid time zones, one in a 12-hour format, one in a 24-hour format, and then for people who are Poindexters or pilots, that third time zone.
That watch was actually on my list. I totally agree with the go anywhere, do anything watch as a travel watch, despite, I guess, two of the pieces on my list not necessarily being that. But I know when I travel, I don't want to have to take my watch off and leave it behind ever. So if I'm going to the hotel pool, or if I'm going to the beach, if I'm swimming in the Rhine, anything like that, my watch is coming with me. And I don't want to leave it in my hotel room or my B&B. It's not the safest way to travel. So being able to not separate from your watch, I do think is extremely important.
Yeah, $4,900 for the Tudor Black Bay 58 GMT.
Gosh, and it's good looking. Look at the gilt. It's very legible. I love this piece.
How do you feel about it having a date?
It doesn't bother me, or I think a GMT in this configuration is completed by a date.
I think it's good, and here's why. A lot of times, particularly if, like me, you often find yourself in Singapore or Hong Kong, you can find yourself a day removed from other folks. And if you're still mentally on your home time, it can be helpful to have that date reminding you what day it is where you are.
I have to say, I have a watch, I'm wearing it now, that is, a big brand GMT with a bicolor bezel and a left-handed crown, and a date at 9 o'clock. And I have to say, I was a little bit weary when I first got this. I love the 9 o'clock date. I don't know what it is. It's just, it's perfect to me. So yeah, I mean, I think a date in this type of configuration is borderline necessary.
So here's the thing about traveling with a watch. We talked about customs, we talked about crime, and you better believe that criminals are watching the social media feeds of people who routinely post expensive watches. You better believe that.
location tagging, the whole nine.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's really creating a liability. Don't do it. Just best practices. You might want to go dark on social media for a few weeks before you travel with something really expensive. But you also have to remember that when you go through customs, they're not just looking for a watch that's really expensive or boxes and papers hidden in your luggage. By the way, always ship them separately. They might be looking for more than one watch. Like if you're wearing one watch and you have another one in your bag or more than one, most customs officers simply cannot believe that a person would travel with more than one watch, and they might flag you as a dealer and assume that you intended to sell these, or that you're bringing back your haul from a buying spree. So I would recommend that if you travel with more than one watch, make one of them something so low value that it would never raise an eyebrow. A G-Shock, a Timex Ironman, a Swatch watch. Swatch watches are always welcome. And then you have something, if you want to do the double-wristed thing, where on one you've got home time and on the other you've got local time. If you have two single time zone watches, make that second watch you're traveling with something that is so low value that in many cases you wouldn't even have to declare it in customs. Something that they're not going to object to or bother flagging.
I feel like listeners occasionally hate when we talk G-Shock, but I would argue that almost any G-Shock is the best travel watch that exists. It is grab and go. It's very easy. It's never going to break. You know, half of them are solar, which will charge in, multiple lights, and easily replaceable.
Very true. Yeah, it can get lost, can get stolen, all those things. The other thing, unless you have that full gold one, if you have the full gold anniversary piece, God help you. But I did a review on one of those, by the way. If you
it's an anchor.
It's an objet d'art. It's very cool. But the thing is, yeah, if you're gonna do like the double-wristed thing, and I do sometimes when I travel, partly because I'm sort of like a character in the watch industry, but also because it's very convenient. And if I've got a watch that I've synchronized to the second, and I'm going out of the country, I want to leave that thing on local time because I'm like that. Then I can just put the local time where I'm going on the Swatch watch, so I can have two different watches, two different time zones. That's another way I travel with a watch. Wear two watches, but always make that second watch cheap. Do not run around with two Rolexes on your wrist. I would also say this.
You're double the target.
That's true. And why wouldn't you be? They're fine timepieces. But when buying a gift, if you're traveling and buying a watch for someone, do what I do for my mom. Every time I go to a new city I haven't visited before, get the local city edition Swatch watch. So now she's got Bangkok, she's got Singapore, she's got Hong Kong, she's got Dubai, she's got Geneva. All of these different places, there's always a Swatch store. And if it's not, I don't know, Gary, Indiana, there's going to be... No offense, Gary, Indiana. But there's going to be a Swatch local edition if it's a major city of the world. And usually you can find it at the airport, so it's easy to buy, too. That's just my advice.
That's a really fun collection.
My mom is now a more prolific watch collector than I am because of those Swatch watches.
That's such a fun collection. I really love that.
So now if you've got a budget, we talked about $4,900 from Tudor. I would say you want to break the bank. You want to do something very different. Well, we talked about world time. We talked about dual time. We talked about world timers that have more than 24 time zones. But the only true universal travel time watch is going to be a travel time watch with two time zones that allows you to set that second time zone to the minute. Then it doesn't matter where you are. North Korea, Venezuela, some weird airport that has a local time zone carve out. If you can set that second time zone to the minute, decoupled from the main time, then you have a true travel time watch that can be correct anywhere. A great example of that is the Jaeger-LeCoultre Duometre UTT, the unique travel time. This was, before Sphero-tourbillon and whatnot, the most complicated duomet for a while, because this movement, in addition to operating at 4 hertz, which is different from the other caliber 380 variants, but it was, compared to the Grand Sonnerie or the Sphero-tourbillon, it was the most complicated duomet for a reason. Although it still has just one oscillator, it uses 2 separate power reserves, 2 separate barrels, to drive a combination of a jump hour second time zone and a conventional primary. And then there is a little globe that you use as a setting guide when jumping through time zones. So it's difficult to describe. I would say its only drawback is that it looks like a watch that's sucking on a marble. But it's really cool because you will be hard-pressed to find many JLCs that are jump hours. As far as I know, this was their first ever wristwatch jump hour that made production. And that second time zone is not just a jump hour, it can be set to the individual minute. So if you're in some time zone that's miraculously 3 minutes removed from the other, this watch can reflect that.
We often bring up Duomet, and honestly, without getting too impassioned on this topic, it borderline infuriates me that these aren't more interesting to a wider range of collectors. It blows me away. These are outrageously complicated pieces from a premier brand with just, drop dead finishing. You have a German silver movement on not the latest editions, but German silver movement on the majority of these pieces. You have interesting complications. Like Tim was saying, an effective perfect dual time watch with a jump hour. It's outrageous that these aren't mid 5-figure watches,
especially that you can buy one of these in gold
for $20,000. It's absolutely outrageous. And Tim, you lived with the chronograph for quite some time. It's reliable.
It was not just reliable, it was the most accurate mechanical watch I ever owned. I set it to the second, I'd wind it every day, with or without the chronograph running. It would be to within a second a day. And because it has 2 power reserves, generally those power systems are split. One will operate the chronograph, one will operate the time, or one will operate the complications, and one will operate the oscillator. And so the way they split those powertrains means that even when you have those extra complications, the watch always has dedicated power to the escapement to maintain perfect isochronous operation. The winding feel is second to none. The movement is built and finished like a Longa. And I would say the UTT to get, I want to say it was a 2015 edition, but white gold, UTT, hammered tremblage dial. Probably my favorite Duomet that I did not own. I owned the black dial white gold chrono. I would like to own the hammered dial UTT. To me, that is the ultimate travel watch. It fails on only one count. I can live without the water resistance. I'm not a swimmer. I do think that a travel watch needs to be well loomed because you may be looking at it in the low light of an airplane cabin on a long haul flight. And I think you just need a little bit more lume. I like to have lume on my travel watches.
That's very fair. That's a very, very, very fair point.
Now, there's a lot of interesting watches out there in the travel genre. I'm going to say if you like to live dangerously, because as far as I know, the company is not still around, but the Maitres du Temps Chapter 3 was...
Wow, what a pull.
Yeah, so weird, but also so good. I would say that Maitres du Temps, which was a project run by Stephen Holtzman, a longtime watch industry executive and salesman, the idea was sort of like, I'm not going to couch this, a ripoff of MB&F, where you'd get like these collaborators to come together and design watches. But the people they brought in were interesting, like Daniel Roth, Roger Dubuis, Kari Voutilainen, Andreas Streller, like genuinely interesting people coming together to make these watches. And the last one, the Maitres du Temps Chapter 3, was by far the most interesting because the finishing and overall design was clearly of Voutilainen's imagination. And then the complication for the second time zone was clearly Streller, because Streller is known for creating outwardly simple mechanisms based on fearsomely complex underlying engineering. Also things that are invisible until you need them. Think the leap year for the Moser Perpetual Calendar on the case back. But here, we had this shutter system where there was a button in the crown, and it was coaxial with the crown, and when you pressed that, the shutters would recess from the dial and disappear, and you would see a second time zone and a little roller barrel that would give you day or night. So 2 roller barrels, one would feature hours, and it would actually jump back and forth as you cycled the time to show the correct number of hours. And then the other roller would show whether it's day or night via a sun and a moon. And so you would never know this complication is there when the shutters are flush with the dial. The dial doesn't look like it's made up of moving parts. It is beautifully integrated. In terms of travel watches, Streller's done a lot, including under his own brand, but this was his magnum opus.
It's remarkably finished from every standpoint. Maitres du Temps, they are a very, I would say the Chapter 3 is the only real wearable one, long term, because they're Chapter 1
they're
and 2
huge
are
and
huge.
awkward, yeah. If you got a huge wrist, those are fine, but otherwise, no go.
Tim has a great video on a piece unique Chapter 3 that style was hand painted with the signs of the zodiac, and it really shows, while you can see the apertures where the quote unquote trapdoors or the
I would call them shutters.
Shutter system kind of recesses. It's a really great. It's kind of a really great indication of what you see when you get the watch, and you activate that on the video, and it's just so cool to watch. It's as crisp as a nice chrono movement, and it happens instantaneously. It's such a cool little hidden complication that just it blows you away when you actuate it in person. And these are extremely rare. I mean, there's very few. There's a couple of different versions of the Chapter 3, but these are double-digit production.
Yeah, I would also say this. They're really cool watches, and they can be maintained. There's nothing in there that a high-level watchmaker couldn't maintain. Guys who can do this are out there. These can be kept going. There's no technology in there like nickel phosphorus that you could never make without galvanic lithography, or silicon that needs to be etched by DRIE. It's just a very complicated and delicate watch that's going to require the attention of a capable watchmaker. But that is not a reason to bail on it. Remember, Harrison's H4 chronometer, which only he understood, has been repeatedly taken apart and serviced by qualified watchmakers since Harrison died. It's maintained. And I remember in the 1880s, there was a watchmaker who was charged with servicing the H4, which has, among other things, a remontoir that was entirely of Harrison's design. And the watchmaker said, I got the thing apart and I despaired of ever getting it back together. And yet he did. And if that can be repaired by a person who never knew the owner, a Maitres du Temps Chapter 3 can be serviced by a person who is a qualified watchmaker. So I say this, it's a very cool mechanism made by two of the great watchmakers of our time. If you have patience to shop around and find a qualified master watchmaker in Switzerland, this can be maintained.
I think that kind of speaks to something. There's a lot of question of long-term servicing with a lot of different brands, specifically kind of smaller indies with very, modern watchmakers. A talented watchmaker can do quite a bit. So a high-end independent watchmaker can do, I don't want to say can do everything, but there's no, despite the romance, there's no sprinkle of magic inside of these watches. There's no spells associated with the cases, right? So
yeah,
it's all mechanics, it's all math, it's all right there.
Yeah, it's not like, the Hellboy movie where they're like, the Nazis, desperate and combining science with black magic, reached into the void. No, and there's none of that.
I actually was just watching The Dial of Destiny last night, which echoes very into this conversation.
Yeah, so, it's, by the way, Hellboy comics and movies, very different, but I enjoy them both.
Both fun, man. Ron Perlman is Hellboy.
That is absolutely true. And my only regret is that they didn't make the third movie. Selma Blair, for obvious reasons, she couldn't go through with it. But Del Toro was going to make the third movie, and it was going to be like Ragnarok. It was going to be like his vision of what it could have been. So if you guys haven't read Hellboy and BPRD, definitely check those out. I'm not going to spoil it, but you can get a crash course in, I'd say, 40% of the Hellboy story by watching the movie. It's just, that's very much a Del Toro vision. Anyway, I digress. But my point is that you can repair these crazy things. There's a guy in Switzerland who does nothing but MCTs. If you ever saw an MCT, you would be amazed that anyone could have built it in the first place, much less take it apart and repair it. So we kind of got off the beaten path for travel watches, but getting back to the theme of traveling with watches and travel watches, Armand, do you find it odd that Omega has no really iconic travel watch in its catalog?
You know what?
It's not that they haven't made GMTs in dual times.
I actually think that they do have an iconic travel watch. I think the Seamaster 300 GMT is iconic in its own right, but I don't think it's iconic to the industry. I think it's iconic to nerds like you and I.
Yeah, I would say for guys who were really into Omega,
I love that watch.
Yeah, back in the late 90s, in 1998, when the GMT version came out with the broadsword hands, that was kind of an enduring look, to the point that it was so admired at the time that they made broadsword hands Seamaster 300 meters that were not GMTs.
Yeah. Okay. But, you know, in a more modern sense, it's been years since I've been to an Omega training now, but I've been at a few Omega trainings, and we're told at each and every single one that all of their modern coaxial chronos can easily be used as dual times, because the hour totalizer and minute totalizer is the same. So if when you're traveling, you can actuate the chronograph at a specific time and have, or rather, let's just say for argument's sake, you're traveling from New York to Los Angeles. If you start your chronograph at 3 p.m. the day before you travel, your that timekeeping on the chrono minute and hour totalizer will be at West Coast time.
That's cool.
So it works in the sense of you just have to keep track of it, but you do have a true dual time zone function in that you just have to click the chronograph at the right time.
That's like one of those watches that has a 7-day power reserve, and people use it as a day of the week indicator. Chop heck.
Wind on Sundays. Yeah, no, you're not wrong. It's a dual function to a complication. It's very interesting. I always like when brands make excuses like that. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think it's fantastic that it works that way.
So another really interesting travel watch, because most people, for some reason, I guess that reason is probably Rolex, associate travel watches with sports watches. There are some incredible dress watch dual times. We talked about the Chapter 3. The Breguet 5717 Hora Mundi is unbelievable. It feels almost more stellar than stellar in that it is a monstrous complication that seems like a very simple interface. You have 2 time zones, including a date. And so only one of them is displayed at any given time. But when you press the trigger, it jumps to the second time zone. And so it can even jump to a different date if that second time zone is at a different date than the one in which you reside. So having 2 mechanically stored time zones and an interface that's clean enough to feature only 2 basic hands. You've got the hours and the minutes. There's not a hidden superimposed hand underneath the hour. It's literally just a 3-hand watch with hours, minutes, and seconds. And as you toggle between the 2 pre-programmed time zones, it will display whichever one is currently selected, even if the hour hand has to jump 12 hours around the dial. Or I guess 6 is about as far as you could ever go. But my point is that it can go wherever it needs to go, and this is mechanically stored in the same way that the countdown time on a Rolex Yachtmaster is mechanically stored until you reprogram it. And it also has a moving date indicator that corresponds. And it features reference cities. So for the place you are in at the moment, it will demonstrate your reference city, and then it'll switch your reference city when you jump to the second time zone. So it jumps the time, the reference city, and the date. That is pretty cool for a watch that does not have an indicated second time zone.
Hora Mundi is murderously cool. Such a cool watch. I believe these are, correct me if I'm wrong here, Tim, are these 46 millimeter watches?
They're not that big.
Are they 44?
I want to say they're 44s.
Okay.
Platinum or rose gold. It has a hand engraved dial, which is made of gold, by the way. So as always the case with Breguet, you're paying like pennies on the dollar for true handmade watchmaking.
It's truly outrageous, the prices on, I mean, everything from vintage to modern Breguet. You know, comparing a retail perspective, it really puts it into perspective for you. I will say I really like the first gen Hora Mundi a lot. I'm in love with the crown.
So here's my thought. Tell me if I'm wrong here, but we talked about the Pilot Doublematic right out of the gate, an alarm with a chronograph and a world time. I actually think alarms are more useful for traveling than second time zones. So for me, an alarm is the way you cope with jet lag and being out of your element and on someone else's time. Like I could tell you that particularly for someone who travels to Europe, Dubai, and the Far East, I've been as much as 13 hours removed from my familiar time zone. I don't know how you can be 13 hours removed. I feel like 12 should be the most. But yeah, when you're that far out of your frame of reference and off your biological clock, it might be helpful to just have a JLC Memovox ready to roll. And on that basis, I don't think they come much better than the Master Compressor Memovox from 2002. So you've got compressor crowns, you've got 100 meters of water resistance, you've got an internal rotating bezel, which is always useful. It's sort of a light-duty diver. And then you've got an alarm that's loud enough to wake you up.
And it is actually loud enough to wake you. It certainly is. That's a really, really burning hot take, actually. I don't know if I'm fully there personally, but that's because I'm thinking of the way I travel, which I don't recommend. But I think you're onto something interesting. An alarm forces you to get on your local time zone. Like it is a physical force chiming, telling you, hey, it's time to do that thing you need to do.
And sometimes you have to leave at weird times.
Oh, yeah. Especially if you're trying to catch a flight that's going international. Yeah.
When I leave Dubai after Dubai Watch Week, I fly out on a 2 a.m. flight. If you fall asleep in your seat at the airport and miss that flight, God help you.
Oh.
So having the alarm ready to go is insurance against disaster if you do have to leave at some weird time when you're off your balance and liable to fall asleep. Also, when I was at Watch You Want back in the day, we were so poor that we had this 3:30 a.m. flight out of O'Hare in Chicago after doing a watch show that ended at 10:30 at night. And we were so smoked from that, no one wanted to get up at 3:30, much less the time you needed to wake up to make a 3:30 flight. So the alarm I had my Grand Memovox with me, and it really helped out. I also think that in some cases you don't have to choose. A Ulysse Nardin Sonata. Now you've got a high-quality alarm, and you've got a second time zone.
Solid pick. Very complicated watch. Forwards and backwards setting. It's outrageous, actually.
And an alarm that allows you to set in more granular terms, where if you want to set it as a countdown, it has one dial that allows you to set a countdown, say 6 hours, and then the alarm goes off. Or you can set it in 24-hour format. If, for example, you need it to wake you up at 11 p.m. specifically, so you don't fall asleep for a late flight, rather than 11 a.m., it knows the difference. So that could be quite helpful. I think having a Sonata with both an alarm and a second time zone might be the best choice. Then you really have it all. What don't you have? Well, you don't have a lot of water resistance, but you do have some lume. So this is a watch that needs to be very seriously considered. And I think that if you are more of a gentleman traveler who's not going to want this thing for diving on a wreck in French Polynesia, this could be the right move for you.
And it is interesting. There's many different versions of the watch. So there's, I don't want to say there's one out for everyone because it is kind of a particular looking timepiece. But if you're interested in something that's maybe a little bit, I would argue that some of these are a little bit more whimsical in terms of their hand shapes, color configurations. This is extremely interesting. But what I will say about it as well is it's finished to an extremely high degree, and you get to see that.
It's a very nicely made watch across the board. I don't really think you can find much fault with it other than the water resistance. Now, is it a bit idiosyncratic? Yes. It's a Ulysse Nardin that came out during the 2000s, and that was a very outre moment for the brand. So at the end of the day, I think it's the most useful combination of features. But remember, you can also get a world time and an alarm with a chrono on that Pilot Doublematic. You just need the wrist for it. What about Breitling? Do we think Breitling's another major brand? I don't really think of any Breitling that comes to mind.
I mean, aerospace for sure.
I would say, yeah, your best choice would be one of the electronic watches.
Totally. And I really, we've talked about these two. I feel like that's my phrase of this episode. We've talked about these two. I feel like the electronic Breitlings are so underappreciated. They are so cool. They're so much fun. you know, they skate this line of being an extremely serious, actual, literal, real world tool watch and not taking themselves too seriously from a brand perspective. They're fun, they're easy. You know, they lose out on water resistance, yes, but they make up for everything else with multiple complications.
I'll say this: standard aerospace or aerospace Evo, that's a 100-meter watch. And you could absolutely swim with that. The water resistance isn't bad.
See, I always get so nervous swimming with a watch like that.
If it's been serviced recently, I'd be okay. I think 100 meters, even if maybe you don't want to test that to depth, I'd have no problem swimming with that on the surface. And you have to replace the battery on a regular basis anyway. So as long as you're up on your battery replacement, I don't see a problem there. So now you're going to get your second time zone. You're going to get all sorts of travel-friendly features.
Chronograph, alarm.
Powered backlight, countdown timer. Again, there's a way you can use an alarm to remind you got to make your flight when you're traveling. It's just incredibly useful. And I think that watch embodies everything you could want in a travel timepiece. You get water resistance, you get lume, you get an alarm, you get a second time zone, you get a countdown timer. And if you do want to be a little bit ambitious, I think you can even set the calendar to several languages.
Yes, you can. And boy, good luck getting it out of a non-native language.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Well, you got to learn to use these things. But I'll say this. The Breitling Aerospace is much more user-friendly than the Omega X33 and Z33. Like the latest versions, they're no longer as intuitive as the original X33 was. That original watch, you could teach yourself pretty quickly. This, the newer Z and X33, you got to read the manual.
I can intuit the Aerospaces. I can intuit G-Shocks. I can't intuit the X33s.
Yeah, I'm well overdue for making a video about those because people constantly ask, and deep down I'm kind of dreading that a client's going to ask me to set it. There was once upon a time I made a video about this, but it was in the watch you want era. So the time has come to update this. I would say another watch I forgot, and this is a little bit of a controversial piece because it's very expensive, but the Patek Philippe 5520p, now you've got a minute repeater quality alarm that can be set in a 24-hour format that also has a second time zone that has a retina scorching amount of lume. That is your Gulfstream travel watch. That is cost no object, and it's platinum. I think that's really cool, but ultimately I don't think it's, if you're looking at Patek, I don't think it's as practical as like a 5224R.
Agreed. I totally agree. It is extremely cool. You get even a Patek, striking system, which is legendary in its own right. And these watches, relative to the retail price, are, I'm not going to use the word affordable, but they are a good value on the secondary market.
Yeah, I would say if you want to find a Patek that's going to give you a very pleasing ratio of value to content, this is going to be your watch. What you get in this watch, the sheer feature set, is astonishing. And again, if you want to look at value pre-owned, this does not hit the market and inflate like a Nautilus. Let's just leave it at that. If you're looking for value, you're going to find it here. And it has all the latest Patek Philippe technologies. And if Patek is to be believed, 30 meters now means a real 30 meters. Visualize that, folks. That's almost 100 feet. So in theory, I don't know that I'm brave enough, but Patek has said 30 meters means 30 meters. Have they not?
They have. They've stood on that ground solidly multiple times now. And there was a big hubbub when they did change from Aquanauts from 120 to 30 meters, but they did.
That's fine, though, because that's taking something is and has always been far more than a 30-meter watch. It hasn't changed. The question is about all these dress watches that have now graduated to swimmable.
Yes, it's very hard for me to say, yes, go swimming with your 5230.
Yeah, so, again, if you do have that fantastic dual-time alarm, Calatrava Pilot monster complication, which is more complicated than a basic minute repeater, Yeah, theoretically, you can swim with it. Like there's a bead of sweat dripping down my forehead as I say that. But I think value is important, and I mentioned Mido early on, and Mido is just a great brand from Swatch Group, where I feel almost like you're getting the level of quality that used to be associated with a Longines, but you're also getting it with a price that is not that far removed from Hamilton. Longines gone a little bit up market. It's not that Longines gone down market. It's just that, Longines is right now where Omega was 15 to 20 years ago in terms of price and product quality. Whereas with Mido, there's a lot of great watches, and one that I always thought was worthwhile was the Ocean Star GMT, because I feel like you get a lot for your money with the Ocean Star GMT. So hear me out. 44 millimeter steel, automatic, $1,530, full bracelet now. You're getting a watch that comes with an accessory NATO strap. You're getting a watch that's 200 meters water resistant, that has 80 hours of power reserve. You're talking about a watch that has a silicone anti-magnetic hairspring, so you don't have to worry about suddenly needing to demagnetize a watch on vacation because the keyboard in your laptop magnetized the hairspring. That's not going to happen. The watch is very robust, and Mido is great about pricing service. By the way, this watch weighs 209 grams, getting pretty close to half a pound. It's a substantial thing.
Why is it so heavy?
It's just a full bracelet, 44 millimeter steel watch.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, it's a very substantial thing. And if you look on the back of it, for travel's sake, there's a little scale that shows you the GMT offsets of major cities. So if you do want to do some mental math,
I love that.
That allows you to use the watch as a true world timer. And once you've got your frame of reference from the back, you look to the dial, and it kind of puts together both parts of the equation. I will say that if you want a more affordable Ocean Star GMT, the Ocean Star GMT, the basic one for $1,530, is a dual time dive watch, whereas the Ocean Star GMT Special Edition, which comes on a very cool mesh bracelet, that one actually has a calculator bezel that works the way a GMT Master 2 does, where you can use it to reckon a third time zone against the 24-hour hand. And this watch, still 200 meters water resistant, still 80-hour power reserve, silicone hairspring. It is a smaller watch at 40.5 millimeters, and it's $1,380. I just think this is a great watch on every level. We talked about traveling with a watch you can afford to lose. It would be painful, but this is not going to break the bank. A watch that could theoretically be stolen without requiring a monumental insurance claim. Again, a watch that's less likely to incite a determined thief to separate both your watch and your hand from your arm. Again, this is a watch that keeps you safe on that front. And Mido is incredibly upfront about service. How upfront are they about service? You go on their website and they give you a list of prices, which is astonishing. And then you get a warranty, a 2-year warranty on the service. So for me, this is almost like the perfect relationship with your watch brand. You get an estimable product for a reasonable price, and then they let you know before you mail your watch what the service is going to cost.
Which the 24-month after service warranty is 2x the industry standard.
Yeah, so again, that's Mido. That's a watch that costs less than $1,400, and it's from the Swatch Group. So if you do worry about the future, that's a brand that's going to be around. So those are our travel watches. Again, not all of this was strictly about having a watch with more than one time zone. Some of it was quite silly. We covered Hellboy, BPRD, watch theft, Arnold Schwarzenegger, celebrity sightings, the Swatch city editions, things you can buy overseas, and why alarms might be the best travel watches. Do you have any parting thoughts, Armand? Is there anything we missed that we need to mention?
I have 2 honorable mentions real quick, and
Okay.
we don't have to dig deep into them. But the Patek Philippe 5134, I think, is a very cool dress travel watch. On a very similar line, slightly more modern, the Laurent Ferrier Traveler, I absolutely adore.
That is a good choice. That's a very fine travel watch.
Very fine, beautifully finished, underappreciated. very legible, and again, multiple different configurations.
And some very cool enamel dials out there if you want to search. Yeah. Very cool. Okay, so if you guys have questions or show topics, send them to podcasts at the 1916company.com. Until next time, Tim and Armand out.